Welcome to Oregon Voters Digest, the program that brings forward the social and political issues that are important to people living here in the Pacific Northwest. And now, your host, Bruce Broussard.
Welcome again to this segment of the Oregon Voters Digest. I'm Bruce Broussard, your host. And by George, we're going to have quite a show tonight. We're going to do you a little update and a little recap of the election results for the primary. And that just basically happened yesterday. We all knew that Tuesday was the day. And they're still counting votes for the mayor and several of the other candidates. As far as the other commissioner seats, they're pretty well intact. But the most important one is going to be basically that of the mayorship. And that was very interesting. OPB just put out a blurb. I've got it here now, and I'm just going to read that real quick. Like, a runoff for Portland mayor's seat looking likely with latest return. It's my understanding that in that article indicated that, was stated that there are 20,000 votes yet to be counted, and they're going to give another count at 6 p.m. Now we're broadcasting right now and recording at 6 here at 5 o'clock, and on Wednesday. But the bottom line is 6 o'clock tonight. I'm going to hear about. I don't know whether we're going to be on by then. We may catch it on the other end, whatever. That's where we are. And the other thing too, we're going to talk about. We're going to be talking about the city of Portland more than anything else, because that's where the issues are. Okay, and so joining me in that arena will be one, as you know, our dear friend who's been knocking on doors big time. I'm talking about my buddy Jack. Yeah, you see Jack there. He got his 101st on, 101st on. He's Army big time. He really did an excellent job. I want to thank him for that. He did an excellent job with the situation and the odds. He was running against 19 people, including himself. That was pretty heavy. But he'll talk a little bit more about that and give us a little bit more background on what that race is all about. And one of the areas that was not discussed, as far as I'm concerned, that should have been part of the campaign, was really talking to the idea of the city, how it should be run, and changing the format of the city government. So I've got a dear friend and someone who's already into the mix as far as a city manager. He's a city manager right nearby and just right adjacent, if you will, to Portland, Oregon, just right around the corner there. And that's a very, very important piece. So Scott's been on Oregon Voters Digest before, talking about the idea of the city planner. We're going to go back and we're going to regurgitate that and have him spend a little bit more time. And then the idea of districtizing the city of Portland was another area, because many voters, if you will still don't understand who do you call, because you can call that mayor every day in and day out, 24/7, and he will not pick the phone up. But if you got someone, if someone was a district and you knew that person's name, one of those commissioners, then you would call someone for sure. Okay, so that's something that should have been discussed, and hopefully we can talk a little bit about that too. The rest of it, we're just going to go over candidly, talk about the results of the election, talk about the numbers, and we're just going to do an overview deal. Then after that, we're going to take a break. Once we take that break, we may bring on I call him Wolfman, Fred Stewart. He's the man. He's out there, but he's out there in the community. And what I mean by that is that very active in the community. I'm sure he's got a lot to say about the results of the campaign. With that, why don't we just get right on in, and I'll start with the other elected official. As far as I'm concerned, he did well in the primary. As far as I'm concerned, he won. And so basically he won for that short run. But the bottom line is that he's going to be very much involved in our local politics for the futures. Okay? Jack, how you doing?
Very well, Bruce. It's a pleasure to be on your program again. I'm not sure I would say I did that well. This was the first time I've run for any election for city commissioner. And as I've been on your show before, the reason I ran was because of the direction our city was going, or not addressing critical issues like really viable plans to help our homeless, affordable housing. Our city programs were actually increasing the cost of housing and causing rents to go up. And the safety on our streets is in appalling shape. Fiscal irresponsibility was a major issue. However, we had, I believe, 18 people running for Commissioner 2. That was the commission held by Nick Fish, who passed away in January. A wonderful man. I corresponded with him through Twitter several times on different issues, and I know he shared my concerns about fiscal responsibility. But it came down to the top vote getters are Loretta Smith, a well-known name, who had run in 2006, or ran in 2016 against Joanne Hardesty. And in the primary, Joanne Hardesty won quite candidly. Loretta is a well-known name. She has been, I believe, an aide for Merkley. But she also carries a history of the Oregonian has had some concerning reports about her performance and how she treats subordinates when she was commissioner in Multnomah County. And there were also investigations or queries or allegations about irregularities on how she used city employees to do some of her campaign work. I suspect that that will come out again. As the person who came in second was Dan Ryan, so he will be in the runoff. I have been in meetings with, or in forums with Dan Ryan. I believe he's very responsible. He always came prepared and was very knowledgeable. So I will come out quite candidly and say I fully support Dan Ryan in the runoff against Loretta. I think he will be an excellent addition on the city council staff. And then there were other people such as Tara Hurst, followed by Julia DeGraw, Sam Chase. I thought Sam, who's a commissioner right now for Multnomah County, would do better. But then Margot Black, Cynthia Castro, and then myself. So that's your top 8 vote getters. And then we sort of have a drop off of other people that have run as well. Obviously, one of the greatest challenges in this campaign was the fact that with the coronavirus, the ability to reach out to people, knock on doors, and have public forums was really not available. So it was down to telephone calls. We put a lot of focus on telephone calls and using social media to reach out. So I reached out to some, but clearly not enough. But I am concerned about the issue our city has faced because with the pandemic we have, unemployment now in Oregon is over 16%. And that's probably an underrepresentation of the actual number of people unemployed, because over the last 3 weeks, I must have gotten 24 emails from businesses who've told me, from medical businesses, restaurants, stores, that they're simply closing. And store owners and small business owners don't typically show up in the numbers for unemployment. So the financial crisis our city and our state and our country is faced with, and quite candidly the world, is very severe. And we're going to need real financial leadership with financial understanding to get our economy for our city, our state, and our country back up on its feet.
Okay, I might mention a couple of little points about your point about Loretta and Dan Ryan. You know, as you note that number was 35,564 for Loretta, and Dan Ryan had 31,632. So there's definitely going to be a runoff.
Yes.
And just like you said with your opening statement about in terms of some of the other candidates that were participating, who you have met, this, that, and the other, and you would think that all of a sudden she's going to have a tough time winning that race at the front with you.
It will be interesting to see who lines up with Loretta and who lines up with Dan Ryan. It will be very interesting. So stay tuned for an exciting race.
Because I noticed also too the total, and what I saw also too was the fact that there was 189,000 votes there. I mean, that voted for that whole piece. And let's say with you and some of the other folks that you had mentioned, Margot and Sam Chase and whatever, if all of a sudden they were to endorse Dan Ryan, then she'd have a tough time. Like you said, she got to do some work. She's going to have to do some work.
Indeed. Yeah, with that many candidates and the split, one got 19% and one got 17%. Yep. That's a lot of votes that can swing the election to one side or the other.
That's right. Then let's see. The other thing I was going to just bring up is the whole issue of let's get through those candidates. But why don't we bring Scott in at this point in time anyway? He's somewhat familiar with this area anyway. he's been around. He's been around the city of Portland, Multnomah County. In many ways, he's been on Oregon Voters Digest so often. In fact, he's got more name familiarity on my show than I have. But Scott's been around. He's been around, and he's been at the legislature in Salem, so he's been around. He knows what's going on, and I'm sure he's been aware of some of these races, whatever. But let's bring him in now and talk about some of the issues that as far as I'm concerned, we did not discuss. We did not discuss even in that primary race. And I thought the media would have brought that piece up, some of those questions. When I was talking about the whole idea of districtizing the city and giving the folks a representation. And the other side was a possibility of changing the format of the mayorship setup from the standpoint of bringing in a general manager. And then I think that would be most effective. Scott, why don't you just come on. I'm giving you just some, but if you want to express yourself in other areas, no problem.
Yeah, so I think one of the biggest lessons of this election, and this is something that Jack was touching on earlier, is that it limited your amount of retail politics that you could do. So it was a complete game changer for all the candidates. And it'll be interesting to see how folks campaign over the summer, because usually you're doing things like parades and county fairs. I never much cared for it myself, but I've never run for anything, right? But I've worked on campaigns, and those are some of the things that you kind of have to do to get out and shake hands and meet people. But now you're like not allowed to shake anyone's hand. So that's right out the window. So that presented some challenges. It meant, on one hand, that big money was important, but in a lot of ways, big money did not win elections. Big money actually lost. And we've seen that happen quite a bit. So, for example, Congressman Greg Walden, who represents most of rural Oregon, right, Central Oregon, Eastern Oregon, Southern Oregon, decided to retire. His seat comes up, and there gets to be a mad scramble on the Republican side. And Newt Bueller, who'd run for governor, raised over $1 million. This guy who's actually from Portland, Jimmy Crumpacker, at the last minute, right before he filed, said, "Oh yeah, hey, my folks have a place over here in the district. I'm living there now." Wrote himself a big check, got endorsed by Oregon Right to Life, and looked like he was making a run of it. And so that presented a challenge. But in the end, that primary was won by Cliff Bentz. I worked with him in the legislature for over years. I think he would do a great job there in Congress.
Was that a surprise? Was that a surprise from your standpoint? That he came in second?
It wasn't a surprise, because he's been pretty consistent. He didn't have a lot of name ID throughout the district, throughout the parts that he didn't represent, right? I mean, he represented in the Oregon Senate a lot of Eastern Oregon counties, and geographically a lot of the state, but it's not highly populated. So he had to get his name out in places like Medford and Grants Pass, without actually being able to go there in person and do retail politicking. So that was a challenge, but Cliff worked hard at it. He had a lot of endorsements and a lot of support. And that's how he was able to pull it off. Now, another statewide race that had a lot of interest was the Secretary of State's race. Indeed. Back in 2016, my dearly departed friend Dennis Richardson was elected Secretary of State, first Republican elected to statewide office since 2002. Passed away a little over a year ago. We're still very sad about that. So now that seat comes open, right? We got Bev Clarno in there as kind of a placeholder. And so the Democratic primary had three really strong contenders. You had McLeod Skinner, who'd run for Congress against Greg Walden last time, had some decent name ID in kind of the rural parts of the state. State Senator Mark Hass and State Senator Shemia Fagan. The public employee unions lined up behind Shemia Fagan big time, right? Because she kind of replaced Jennifer Williamson, who's the former majority leader over there in the House. She dropped out because the press was asking about the way that she had spent some of the campaign funds over there. And so Shemia stepped in, and technically on paper, Mark Hass has won. That's another one of those races that's really close. And that'll be an interesting dynamic for the Secretary of State's race, because I think I've worked with Mark Cass on a successful statewide measure in 2012. I think he's a statesman. I think he's a gentleman. And he would actually do the job of Secretary of State well. Shemia Fagan is regarded by a lot of current and former Republican legislators as being kind of shrill and partisan, and petty and thin-skinned, and she was very difficult for a lot of folks to work with. So I think the general election contest, if it was between her and Republican Kim Thatcher, who got the Republican nomination, that would have been probably pretty nasty. That would have gotten pretty nasty after a while. But I think Senator Thatcher and Senator Hass have had a good enough working relationship where they'll still, have a healthy contest, but it won't be nearly the dogfight that it would be if Shemia Fagan were involved. So those were kind of some of the bigger statewide offices. And even, bringing it back to more local to the Portland area, Metro's homeless measure passed. So last cycle in 2018, you had an affordable housing measure pass. Now you've had this measure pass. And, people obviously recognize that affordable housing and homelessness are huge issues that are intertwined. But in this case, you've essentially given Metro a blank check to, quote unquote, solve these problems. And I think it's going to be incumbent upon Metro to actually show some results for it. Because if we're still talking about this 2 years from now, 4 years from now, you say, hey, look, we passed these measures, we gave you all this.
Where's the money? What have you done?
Yeah.
Well, if I can interject on that for one particular issue, the thing that concerned me about that issue was that, again, it initially came out and it was a description of 100 words. So there was no details whatsoever on how the money was going to be spent, a timeline on how it was going to be used over year 1, year 2, year 3, year 4. And again, in theory, $250 million a year was going to be raised. It's yet to be determined if that money will actually be raised or not. But when I asked Sam Chase, who was one of the people that were very proud of Multnomah County raising that proposal, he said, well, that's all the description we have. Trust me, the county will spend it wisely. But again, so many years of my career in business, you could not come to a board of directors for a $250 million a year operating budget without justification, without a very well laid out plan on how the money was going to be spent, what your metrics were, and how you were going to measure that. So the issue of supporting the homeless, I think we would get a 95% support. I think the big pushback by some people, by at least 40% of the people, was the fact that there wasn't a plan that explained how it was going to be used.
But you think about it, again, on that same point, Jack, I think one of the reasons why I think the public sort of went that way a bit, because ordinarily you would have thought that the county and the city would have been dealing with the whole piece of homelessness, right, and housing. That's where it was. And a lot of folks just didn't feel comfortable with they still don't feel comfortable with the city and the county. In fact, that's why we're having this issue with reference to the present mayor running for mayor with so many people running against him. You got me? And I just got off the so-called campaign trail, the county, and I saw the problem. They've got many problems there at the county. You got me? So the people are just kind of just saying to a certain degree, boom, someone comes up with a proposal, and tax the rich, right? Tax the rich and spend the money. It's kind of deal.
Well, I think that's the obvious first pass appeal is it's
Exactly.
not going to impact me and the wealthy can afford it. And I understand that. My only question about that is this the best way we're going to spend the money?
Agree.
Is this, with the current conditions we have, the most effective manner to help the homeless and to help the issues in our city? And
That's
our
right.
county?
Agree. Well, I might add too, because I haven't running for mayor this time around, and I get running for that other seat about 2 years or so ago. Again, I had some goals during that particular time, and one of my goals was to make sure we took the mothballs out of Wapato, the Wapato facility, and unfortunately today, guess what? It's going to be a homeless place. It's going to be a homeless place for the next 5 years. Jordan basically leased out the place to the individual that's going to be managing about 250 beds to start with, and you've got 5 years. He leased for $1 per dollar.
Well,
Hopefully,
Bruce, I'll also add on that one, it's now called Bayview Lakes. The group they have running that has 10-year track record of setting up type of operations like this. Their program, I've sat down with the director. It is exceptional. It's very well laid out. It's an individual program for each person, depending on their background, their medical history, whether or not there's addictions, mental illness, and their success rate is exceptional. It would be clearly recognized as one of the best in the country. And their operating cost is $4.5 million a year.
Mhm.
So from that standpoint, I'd like to see a year or 2 years performance of Bayview Lakes. And if that model works, then that's where I think our county should be going to replicate that in other areas to make sure we've got a network of these facilities to help the homeless.
And I think, again, just adding a little bit to that piece, and I guess the only problem that I see, we're still, we're right in the middle of the swamp of Oregon, Portland. You got the city of Portland here. And as you know, you've got other entities that are dealing in the whole issue of homelessness. You had Homer Williams, who basically tried to put his piece together. And he's got some piece right over here off the Burnside Bridge doing that piece, but he's a major factor. And then there was Kate Duran, who had also did it on this Wapato piece, was working very closely with Jordan, and she was with the Volunteers of America, very successful operation. Unfortunately, they weren't picked. You got me? They weren't picked. So that's that divide, if you will, that we have here within this arena. And then the county would not, during the early stages, would not provide any funding to the owners, if you will, to basically be able to identify with some of the entities that I mentioned, basically get a contract from the county or get a contract from the city. Well, guess what? They didn't get anything. And so I would hope that that's the other issue that the entity is looking at. I'm glad, but within the next 5 years, hopefully, we might be getting some funding from the county and or the city. At one point in time, the mayor was thinking about the possibility of making it a homeless camp, but the politics between the city and the county was such, he did not get a vote from the county, from Deborah Kafori. So as a result of that, guess what? They went out and they got a woman by the name of Betsy. And I'm sure you know Betsy. Was it Betsy? What's up, Betsy Preston? I guess Betsy. Oh, come on, Bruce. Anyway, she's from the coast. She's a senator. I'm not mistaken, but I'll remember that name very shortly. But anyway, she was the one that found this gentleman that's in there right now. She found the program and bought him. She knew Jordan, and as a result of that, he's in there. So like you said, I wish him all the luck in the world, and hopefully that will continue on because it's a beautiful facility. You have the capacity for be putting about there's 500 beds in the facility itself. There's enough real estate there to throw in an addition of another 500 beds. So it's a beautiful spot, this facility, and it's away from downtown. It's away from downtown. And for some strange reason, that was a hard sell. And I know I was pushing it. We need to take the homeless off of the streets from downtown Portland. And that's the living room, if you will, of the state. I mean, that's the entree aspect of it. So consequently, they don't have the money. They can't exist there, But there's this mindset. And let's continue the peddling thing and all of the other stuff that goes along. Okay, but anyway, hopefully we'll have a success about the program, and that's what we're going to be on top. Voters Digest going to be there, and like you, Jack, we're going to be interviewing you and maybe getting the gentleman down at Bayview Lake to come on and kind of just do a kind of like a quick audit of vetting to kind of keep him on track and help him out, because he is going to need some help, if you will. He's going to still need some help to get this thing successful. Because I'm like one more point I might add is that the other entities who are getting federal dollars, the number of homeless, are not willing, if you will, to recommend those individuals to Bayview Lake. See, so he's going to have a problem recruiting 250 homeless folks because they are affecting somebody else's budget, like Metro. Okay, just like Metro. Once they get that money, the idea is they got to identify with homeless. Where are they going to go? So then you got the politics supporting them. What it
You
is.
know, Bruce, that's the other issue, that with over 320 nonprofits that are all working to try and help the homeless, there's no coordination with those different groups. And many of them would really welcome that opportunity to have a network, an opportunity to coordinate their efforts together. And you are right, they are all competing from the same funding or sources of funding, whether it's the federal, state, or the county levels.
Well, that was one of the things that I'd mentioned about our late Secretary of State, Dennis Richardson. One of the things he used to talk about was this idea of perpetuating problems, right? And
Yes.
that what you end up doing sometimes, even though that's not what you're intending to do, is you institutionalize a problem because you
Right.
say, here's the problem, let's create an agency devoted to solving that problem. And you've assured that it's going to last forever. Even Ronald Reagan said, right, the closest thing to eternal life is a government program. So I don't think anyone intends that at the front end, but then it becomes this cycle. And that's what you keep seeing, where
Yes.
year after year you come back and you say, oh, we still have this problem. Well, right, because we need more money. So, well, I'll give you a budget increase last time. Okay, we'll give you more money. And so that's one thing you might end up with between the affordable housing measure and this homeless measure. Metro now has a lot of power and a lot of authority and a lot of money going its way to maybe solve these problems at some point, but you might end up perpetuating them instead. Because now you've got an entire class of folks who are the clients who are dependent on this program, and then you've got the folks working in the program. So you've got two key constituencies, and we've seen this come up in the state over and over again, where times like today, the red forecast came out, it's a disaster. You got to start cutting the budget. And every time you say, okay, well, what about this program here? Then you've got those two groups of people, right? Those two constituencies, the people who are being serviced by the program and the people who are doing the servicing, all coming before the legislature saying, no way, we need this program. We're dependent on it.
Yeah.
Well, I think the other thing is we have to recognize that a nonprofit may be a non-profitable business, but there is still overhead. And
Yes.
if you look closely at the nonprofits, the amount of overhead that you have for every dollar that someone may give or is given from the federal, state, or county level, or an individual contribution, you will find that the overhead on that dollar that actually goes to help the person in need may be only 60 cents, and in some cases as low as 40 cents. So we have to recognize that the overhead costs are one of the key metrics to determine which nonprofit we need to work with and which nonprofits we should push aside and say, I'm sorry, your performance is not as good as the others. We need the best performance to help the people in need. And that's something, unfortunately, has not been a focus on the county and then on the city level either.
Well, and Oregon has a lot of nonprofits. I remember when I was doing some reporting back in even 2008, right? They did a release about how there were all these nonprofits statewide that were in danger of losing their nonprofit tax status because they hadn't filed their paperwork. So this is a fraction of the nonprofits from over a decade ago, and this list was just pages and pages and pages long. Right? You can break it down by city and go, okay, nonprofits. I was in Grants Pass at the time. Several of them even there.
Portland per capita has more nonprofits than any other city, not just in the United States, but in the world. So yes, it is a booming business here.
I've served on as a board of director on no fewer than 4 different nonprofits, but a lot of those nonprofits have staff. They have executive directors, and some of those executive directors are decently compensated.
Yes.
You're right in that their overhead's the same as anyone else's overhead, and that's especially when it comes to public budgeting. Right? We just passed our budget here for the city. A lot of the costs are personnel costs.
Sure.
We have to hire people to do the work. In our case, we have a pretty small staff. A lot of our budget also goes towards contract services, right? Okay, we can hire people in-house to do these things, but it doesn't make sense. So we've got these other companies that we hire to do it. But even then, those companies, they're paying people to do the work. their personnel costs. And then you have your buildings, you have your equipment. So most budgets are pretty similar in terms of what they actually are. That's where I look at education and go, okay, your average school, your average public school, what are your expenses? You have buildings to maintain and you have teachers to pay, right? And then you've got to keep the lights on. Same thing with the public university, and you see tuition going up and up and up. You say, well, why does tuition keep going up? Well, because you have no reason not to charge more and more tuition, and the university professors all expect to get paid, and they're not making any less than they were. And you guarantee loans, but I mean, that's a whole other different discussion.
Right. Well, hey guys, this might be a good point to just take a short break, and we'll be back, and we'll get this back. I'd like to continue that conversation because I was working with an outfit called United Way. Remember that one? United Way. And boy, they had a complete package there, big time. They were servicing the entire industry. It was the only major nonprofit in the city of Portland that was basically dealing with homelessness and the whole 9 yards. We'll have a little bit more of that right after the break. Okay, we'll take a short break. We'll see you in a moment. Welcome back to the Oregon Voters Digest. I'm Bruce Broussard, your host here. And by the way, for those of you who might have missed that first section, you can catch it. The dates are up there in terms of when it's for repeats and this, that, and other. It'll be definitely on. It's live now here Sunday, and then following Tuesday and Friday respectively. You can get it on Comcast. You can always get it on YouTube or Facebook, whatever mediums you have. You can catch the show. And the updates that we're giving you right now as on the results of the primary. And these are key issues. And boy, I tell you, there's going to be some interesting things come August, for that matter. And we might be able to discuss some of those things, a few more of those facts, and then talk about some of the key issues here in Multnomah County, city of Portland, because this is a factor. This is the largest city and the largest county in the state of Oregon. And we've got some major issues that we have to resolve. They're going to be the point person for the whole issue of coronavirus, homeless, if you will, the whole issue of immigration. We got a presidential election coming up, and we're going to be very much involved in this whole process, the presidential election. So, hey, you got to be aware and pick up that, again, to get that voter's pamphlet and read that material. Watch out for that material that's coming across you, coming through your mailbox. That's another interesting fact. Got a lot of spams during that time. Lots of spams. People all over the place. I mean, okay. Well, anyway, when we broke on the first half, we were talking about the whole issue of homelessness and basically where do we go from here. We don't have a plan. We do not have a plan for the city of Portland and Multnomah County. We do not have a plan for the state, for that matter. Okay? A lot of times the dependency you would think would be towards the larger city and the larger Multnomah County, the larger area. Imagine Multnomah County, the city of Portland, sits right on I-5, the highway that leads on either way. You got the state of Washington on one side, you got the state of California on the other side, and they've got problems. And as a result of their problems, they're trying to shift their problems to us. We're right in the middle. They're getting vouchers from the state of California and the state of Washington. Okay, so I think upcoming come the summer, we're going to really have some problems here in the city of Portland. We've not had it as of late, but I'll tell you, they're moving in. I had the opportunity to go to Delta Park the other day when I was going grocery shopping at one of the stores down there, and I was looking at the cars that were parked over there at Delta Park, okay, nearby. California license plates, Washington license plates, RVs and things of that nature. People just parked around, throwing garbage all over the place, throwing stuff all over the place, and I knew it was clean about 3 days before that. Here we are again. So we need a plan, folks. We need a plan. And hopefully they're still looking at the numbers right now. They're counting some 20,000 votes. See whether or not we're going to have a runoff with the mayor of Portland. Well, in all due respect, we need a runoff because this way we can talk about these issues again. And I could have some of the same guys that are here now with us today so we can sort of help them to put that plan together. One of these folks is going to get elected other creative ways, but the fact of the matter is we need a plan. So that's what we're going to do. We're going to start talking about some of those issues now. We just happen to have Scott Jurgensen, who's here. He's a city planner, and that's one area that we've spent a little bit more time on that piece. The whole issue of districtizing the city of Portland. And the other thing is that we've got a new sheriff in town over here at Bybee. I normally call it, as you know, the whole issue of Wapato jail during that particular time. But the fact of the matter is that it's all part of the scenario. And we was mentioning right after we took the break, we mentioned about what we had initially to deal with the whole issue of homelessness, housing, a whole bunch of things. And guess where the funds were picked up at? It wasn't government funds. It was as a result of the good work that the Goodwill was doing. An entity was a nonprofit, but they would basically go out and raise the money from the private sector, from the public, across the board, get the money, fund the whole deal. They would audit and they would check all of the organizations that were out there to make sure that they were doing the job. And if there was a need, they'd go on and lobby and market to create another entity, whatever, to solve the problem. So we had a solution and we had a plan during that time. But today, like I said, if you look at the front of the deal, you understand where we come from. We got all sorts of agencies today, and they're all looking at picking up that money from the federal income. They got money for days and have no idea, couldn't even spell homelessness, let alone get the work done. And just one other little note in regards to the whole issue of the new metro thing that was just passed. I remember working very closely with Metro because I was working for one of the large haulers in their waste management, like waste management. And I was on one of the boards and committees and whatever, where we basically talk about how do we pick up, i.e. garbage, if you will, and recycle it. That's right, okay? But the fact is, that's where their efforts were. That's what they were. We spent a lot of time at Metro in garbage. And at the zoo, we did the zoo. And then the whole issue of land management, things of that nature. I mean, so the thing is, that place was full. Now all of a sudden we're getting into the homeless program. They have no business of being in that area. So with that, I'm going to bring these guys back on in, and I'm just going to sit back and relax, and I'm going to throw it to Jack, and Jack can run with it however he wants to run with it. He will get Jeff, and Scott. We'll get Scott to come on in there. I almost put one of the folks who's running this whole program with Steve, but he might jump in here for a minute and make a statement one way or the other. But you never know. He was telling me the other day when I was running, he said, Bruce, I think I might give it a shot. Anyway, I'll just leave it at that mark. Okay, got to chuckle sometime, if you will. Jack, what we got? What's on your mind?
Well, one of the questions that was raised by myself and a few others, but was asked by quite a few different organizations is, should the city of Portland change our council city form of government? Right. The council city form of government is over 100 years old. We are the largest city to still retain this system. Most cities have gone to a much different system. Primarily, the differences include things like most cities today, almost all large cities, all the major cities, in fact, have a professional city manager that reports to the mayor. And then they also have city commissioners, and they have commissioners by district. So there is equal representation across the city by each of these commissioners for the city, whether it's a massive city like Los Angeles or even a smaller city like Oregon City. Now, the difference is, another major factor is city commissioners in Portland, with the system we have, are expected to run bureaus. Well, running a bureau is like running a business. And quite candidly, most of the problems we've seen over the last 4 or 5 years that I'm aware of have been by a lack of oversight by city commissioners that simply do not have the basic understanding of the rules and regulations for running a business. As an example, last year, about August, September, we had the Water Bureau. Now, whenever you go out to make purchases, most companies, large companies in particular, and cities have requirements that based on the size or the cost of the purchase, you have to go out and get multiple bids to make sure you've got the most cost-effective bid. Well, in this particular case, the person in the Water Bureau went out and broke up the actual acquisition or purchase into several smaller purchases so they would not have to go out for tender. And then the person who placed the order bought those goods from her husband that ran the company. Now, the city commissioner, Commissioner Fritz, who will be retiring, came out and said, well, there's nothing wrong with that. I'm sorry, Commissioner, that's against the law. And in fact, if you were working for corporations like I have, you would be fired on the spot, and the person that did that would not only be terminated, more than likely they would be facing criminal charges. That's a very basic factor that you have to understand that you can't do. And we have cost overruns of 200, 300, 400%. There's no excuse for that. I've run multi-billion-dollar projects around the world where we've come in over a 5-year period of time on budget, or as slightly under budget, on time, and deliver those kinds of results. So to see a 300, 400, 500% cost overrun with no planning is quite candidly a lack of leadership or expertise in how to lead a business and to run a business for major bureaus. And these bureaus have got hundreds of people working for them, and they have major budgets. We have to realize the total budget for the city of Portland next year, according to Mayor Wheeler, will be $5.2 billion. Well, we don't want to waste taxpayer money, at least I hope we don't. And so that's why in many of the cities, they say we want a professional city manager that can streamline the bureaus to make sure we don't have silos like we have right now. We can improve the efficiency, and we can improve the service for the city. And then the city commissioners, like in Oregon City, those positions that are elected, they actually are not paid any salary whatsoever. Whereas we pay our city commissioners somewhere between $90,000 and $140,000 a year. So to be candid, and I will quote Mayor Wheeler in an interview he gave a few years ago, we have city commissioners without the expertise needed to be a city commissioner. So that can be simply changed with a more modern system of city government. That type of plan is supported by the League of Women Voters and also the city, different groups across the city as well. So from that standpoint, that's an issue that we need not just to talk about, we need to take the right steps to implement a new type of city government that's more efficient, cost-effective, and allow elected officials to be a representative of their districts, not just leading bureaus.
Good, good. Scott, why don't you come in now and sort of share with the viewing audience what are some of the activities of a city manager and the benefits of doing such, and maybe including the districtization at the same time, if you have such.
Sure. Jack was talking about Oregon City, and actually I was really good friends with one of the former city managers in Oregon City, and he was instrumental in helping me pick the career path that I'm on. He's retired from the profession now, right? But that was my background, was as a newspaper reporter covering city government in small towns over the years and just seeing how it worked. So every one of those towns, from small to, I don't know, I mean, Grants Pass is decently sized these days, right, had that same form of government where you have a mayor and a city council, and they give direction to a city administrator, city manager, right, depending on the size of the town. My technical title is city recorder because it's a very small town, but I act as the chief administrative officer for a town of about 1,000 people. And so my duties include, human resources, risk management, and a lot of it day to day is just relationship management, right? But I also went to graduate school for this. So I have an executive master's in public administration from Portland State University. So the way that it's working in Portland right now is that you have elections, which are popularity contests essentially, and then somebody wins that popularity contest, and then all of a sudden, like Jack was talking about, you're put in charge of this bureau or that bureau, regardless of your actual expertise in that or lack thereof. And sometimes those become political decisions. The mayor is mad at this commissioner or something he said publicly, so he's going to change his bureau assignment. right? Where you worked over this, but you liked it, and I'm mad at you, so now I'm putting you in charge of sewers. Well, what does this guy know about sewers? Nothing, literally nothing. Even the idea of districts, right? In smaller towns, you can't really do that. The city I work for, it's at large because you only have 1,000 people total. But with Portland, what you've seen over the years is some areas have felt underrepresented, like on the east side. And you can even see it driving around in the fact that some of these areas, when they were annexed into the city, were promised that they would have things like paved streets and sidewalks and parks, right? A lot of your families are now over on the east side and they don't have parks. You have a lot of food deserts in those areas where you go long stretches without any grocery stores. Public transportation is limited. So they don't have the same amount of representation. So I have seen some cities, I think Grants Pass is even one of them, where they have wards, where they just kind of divvy up the city and say, okay, we've got 2 seats from the northwest side of town and all the other different sectors. But Portland doesn't do that. It's just kind of winner take all, for better or for worse. But I mean, I think a lot of people agree that the city of Portland, and I'm a Portland resident now, could be a lot better run than it is. And it kind of sets people up for failure too.
Yes.
If you're one of these commissioners, if you're the mayor, you're put into a system and a structure that, as Jack was saying, just doesn't reflect common modern public management practices. I mean, the short answer is that there's reasons that most cities don't do it the way that Portland does.
Right. I think it's important to recognize that although I live on the southwest part of Portland, most of my time on my campaign was reaching out before we had, of course, the new regulations, was reaching out to groups in the east side of Portland and North Portland as well. And what I consistently heard was, once we have a commissioner that's elected at large, they never come out and visit us. So but yet we have a Senate, state Senate, and House of Representatives that are elected by districts. And it's the standard practice that in my district, Senator Burdick holds town hall meetings and tries and encourages the electorate to come out. Now, when you have a ward or a commissioner by a particular district, then I can guarantee you that person will be more connected to the group they are representing, especially if they want to run again for office. And they will be a strong voice or advocate for that part of the city. But you're absolutely right. The inequality across our city is, in my opinion, unacceptable. And there are things that we could do about it. Like, for instance, I was shocked to find out we don't use in our city urban development plans outside of creating one on paper. As if we had a real urban development plan, it would be a coordinated plan with transportation, PBOT, with Parks and Recreation, with sewer, and the water department. So as we make changes, we would make sure we've got an integrated plan. So when we build schools or new schools, that we've got to make all the facilities that are available for the people that live in that area and send their children to schools. So again, that's the problem with another problem with our system is, quite candidly, we have each of these bureaus working independently. Now, the people in those bureaus are working quite hard and doing the best job they can, but they have basically blinders on because they cannot interact with other bureaus, even though they may be or have overlapping duties.
Okay.
By the way, I'm also over in Southwest, so we would be in the same district.
Okay.
Right? And that's one of the things, that the way that Portland is laid out, it wouldn't be difficult to do a district system because
Agreed.
the city has quadrants. There's a natural quadrant there, right? The river divides it one way, Burnside divides it the other. So you've already got southwest, southeast, northwest, northeast, and everybody's pretty familiar with what those are. And you also have enough of a population in the city, right? You're around 600,000 or thereabouts, to where you wouldn't have this issue of running into not having enough candidates. There would be plenty of people to run for seats in every one of those districts.
I think that's a good point. And the thing that's also important to recognize when we talk about these districts, and I talk about these urban development plans, I don't think people fully appreciate the geologic and geographic diversity we have across our city. The areas where we have the hills have different types of problems relative to what type of infill housing you can put in because of the slope and also the type of seismic activity that we do have and also the water runoff problems they have there. You go further out in areas, let's say in Northwest Portland, you also have things like earthquake liquefaction zones. So the building structural requirements there are different than they would be, let's say, in the Southwest. So it's very important that you get all these factors together to try and develop an urban development plan. And again, that's something that I saw was considered standard practice in more modern cities and more progressive cities than Portland, even though Portland likes to consider itself a progressive city. In many ways, I find it very conservative and resistant to change.
Well, and even then, you think about your neighboring communities.
Yes.
So you and I are in Southwest, right? Before this, I lived in Lake Oswego. I was literally not even a mile and a half from where I live right now. My nearest community, okay, I do shopping in Tigard because it's just right there. Now, if you're in North Portland, your neighboring city is in another state. Right?
Yes.
You're going over to Vancouver. If you're over in Northwest, you've got like St. Helens right over there on that side. So you're right that it's a dynamic for each, and a lot of times you have the same kind of interests represented the legislature for years, and it has to be, right? Everybody represents a different district for equal population from all over the state. Everybody is equally represented.
Right.
But you don't get that in Portland, right? In a previous appearance on the show, I said you could have a city commission that consists of people who live in the same house, right? Yeah. Wouldn't make any difference. Same neighborhood, right? They could all be next door neighbors. We get that here in the town that I work in, right? A lot of my city councilors are neighbors, but right. It's a small town.
On that particular note, Scott, let's talk a little bit about public safety in that kind of a situation with the idea of a districtization and the personalization aspect of it. You hear the word about the community policing, for that matter, you know what I'm saying? And what that means is it's just a relationship kind of deal. And you were sort of talking about that kind of a deal. How does that compare with, if you can sort of cite that with Portland and Multnomah County?
Well, the city that I work for had its own police department for years. And that gets really difficult because of liability issues, because of small town politics. And so what they do now is they contract with the sheriff's office. In fact, the council just voted last week to renew our intergovernmental agreement with the sheriff's office. So Marion County is a very large county. One of the things they've had to do is create a special service. A lot of their calls were going to this one particularly bad part of Salem that isn't in the city of Salem, right? But a lot of their deputies who would otherwise be patrolling rural areas were having to go hang out there all the time. So they created their own district there. They upped their recruitment. And what we have is dedicated patrol. We have a dedicated deputy. I saw the same thing in other small communities. Cave Junction did the same thing down in Southern Oregon with the Josephine County Sheriff's Office. They contract and they get a dedicated for X number of hours a week, depending on how much they pay. So that's different than the city of Portland, which has its own police department, which, as we were talking about the structure of the city government, it's run, that whoever wins the election that the mayor decides, and it's usually the mayor, right? So the mayor is in charge of the police. Well, okay. But depending on who that mayor is, they may or may not be qualified. Now, Ted Wheeler, to his credit, is an educated guy. He's the former state treasurer, former county commissioner, right? You could do a whole lot worse. But even he is set up for failure given the system.
Yeah, he's not the police commissioner. Or is he? Or is he?
He's not a police officer, right?
Yeah,
Ted Wheeler does
yeah,
not have a
exactly.
background in law enforcement.
Yeah, in fact,
Right.
at that point, he's not even the mayor when it comes to police. It seems as though the police pretty well runs the mayorship, if you will, when it comes to police work. I mean, that's just kind of like the confusion. Is that even I throw this kind of thing on the table, and a lot of folks would agree with it, with that aspect of it. I mean, he is supposed to be he's the commanding officer, if you will, across the board. And Jack understands that when we talk about military, we understand the chain of command. We have no chain of command in the city of Portland aspect of it. I mean, to go outside of the city and bring in a chief, and you know, her name was Outlaw at the time, and she came here for a few days, picked up some big checks, picked up her resume, and went to another city. What did we get? We got nothing, and we're still right where we are. You know what I mean? You got, you know, so my point is that that's an issue that we have. Again, no plan. No plan.
Well, I think that also talks about the type of system that we have, because what the police have actually done is, yes, they have a chief of police and now they have a deputy chief of police.
Right.
So effectively what we have is the chief of police is acting as police commissioner, because obviously the mayor has no background or qualifications to be a police commissioner. And then the deputy chief is now acting as chief of police. So we've got a workaround to the system, but we need a new system, because obviously this is one of many flaws with the type of city council system. And just from a historical standpoint, the model that we copied our city council system was Galveston, Texas, over 100 years ago. So I think you'll look at Galveston and say, may not want to, needed a little more modern system that we have. And Galveston recognized that quite a few years ago and is using a more modern, updated system of city governance.
Well, guys, look
Well, and Jack's right about that, because you look at most cities and the way they're structured. Here's your police department. Here's your chief of police. You know who oversees the chief of police? The city manager. Okay, right. And who oversees the city manager? The city manager takes direction from the city council and the mayor. And if they hear citizen complaints about the police department, then they go to the city manager and say, hey, you need to do something about this.
That day-to-day piece, day-to-day. Well, guys, look like this would be an opportune time to sort of give it up. I think you and the audience sort of gotten an idea of what we're talking about. We need a plan. And we may have the opportunity, if you will, to have that discussion in this runoff with the mayor, because it brings all the issues back to the table aspect of it, which in fact we'll have the opportunity to hopefully try to educate the public and give them some idea of what's being talked about, so that they can make that educated guess and vote, if you will, to the mayorship having to run again, if you will. We've got two people running for mayor, but I hear rumors that someone's thinking about a write-in. Because the two people that are going to be running are maybe not as qualified as they are. So that's going to be an interesting piece. I would tell you who that person might be, but I'm not going to divulge that kind of information at this point in time. I'm just going to have you thinking and guessing. You know, I mean, the mystery guest is sitting behind the scene right now. You can't see him. I sort of mentioned his name. I won't mention it again. But anyway, look, it's been great, and thanks for getting out to vote. We didn't vote that much, but the bottom line, we voted. We got out there. We'll be ready for August, and I'll see you next round. But make sure you tune in. Make sure you tune in and tell your friends about the Oregon Voters Digest and tell them that they can access this right off the bat. It's Sunday. It's a Sunday. We'll see you next Sunday. Have a good one.
Very good. Thank you very much.